I said, he's in Greenville, Texas. And they said, how long has he been there? I said, well, not long, I don't think. And I've learned that that's really a matter of opinion, because it really matters what you define as long. Found out today he's been there for 33 years. So to some, that's not long, but to some, it may be literally a lifetime. It would have been for Jesus. So I'm grateful to have Brother Bobby here. And Brother Mark mentioned that he heard him 15 years ago. Well, I heard him 7.5 years ago. And I was just as enthralled and educated then. So I'm happy for Brother Bobby to be here tonight. Looking for the presentation that he has for us, and I'm going to give him the floor now. Brother Bobby, you come and lead us throughout this wonderful study. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, brother. Thank you for the invitation. What you're going to find out is pretty quick in my presentation. This is not about a tabernacle. It's about Jesus Christ. It just gives me an excuse to preach Jesus, okay? And so that's the theme this week, is I'm going to be all about Jesus, and you may learn some things about him that you did not know before. A lot of things to glean from it. By the way, tonight begins in America. It started last night in Israel, but tonight, if I'm not mistaken, begins a Feast of Tabernacles. Sukkot, they call it in Israel. The biblical term is the Feast of Tabernacles. Now, Jesus spent most of his ministry up in Galilee area. About 75-80% of the time, Jesus was up in Galilee. And he only came down to Jerusalem for holidays. Well, those Jews in Jerusalem hated Jesus, so he avoided Jerusalem as much as he could. But he came back on the holidays. Now, the last 6 months of his life and ministry, he left Galilee and came down to Jerusalem, but he came down to Jerusalem on the Feast of Tabernacles. And he came into Jerusalem, and when the Feast of Tabernacles was about to start, the disciples up in Galilee asked him, "Are you going to go?" And he sent the disciples ahead of him on down there, and he just kind of come sneaking in. Well, at the Feast of Tabernacles in Jerusalem, back at the time of Christ, that was the end of the year. It's in September, early October. The rainy season is about to begin in a couple of 3 weeks. It's nice and cool. The weather's great. It's beautiful. All of the harvest have been completed, and everybody has now they're beginning to relax at the end of the year and have a celebration. So at the Feast of Tabernacles, they would bring their offerings to the temple, and they would come down there and worship, and it was an 8-day celebration. Well, everybody was supposed to move out of the house, and move out in the yard or somewhere, and build a booth out of tree limbs. They have a tent. They just had to move outside and live outside their homes, because they were commemorating their exodus from Egypt, and for a week they had to live outdoors like the Israelites lived out in the wilderness in their journey, the 40 years in the journey. But at the temple, every day at the temple, the priest would, in the afternoon, late afternoon, they would go down the hill from the temple to the pool of Siloam with a gold pitcher and gather up a gold pitcher of water and come back up to the temple area. Now, just about this time of the day, they had a special lighting of the menorahs in the courtyard, also called the women's court, or the treasury where the widow would have given her mites. And in that compound area there, it would hold about 3,000 people. Could all get inside there, and they had these giant menorahs set up so that they could light it up at night. And so late in the day, there was the priest gathered, there was the Levitical choir and the orchestra on the steps of the temple. And they're playing their music, the choir singing, the people are outside doing their Jewish style of dance, and the folk are happy and they're celebrating. and then the priest would take that pitcher of water and walk around the altar and pour the water out like he would pour out the blood round about the altar. And it was called a water oblation service, or a offering of water. And while he's pouring out that water, then they're praying, they're thanking God first for a bountiful harvest this year and God's blessings that he had poured out on them. And they're praying for a good rain. Rainy season is about to start, so they're praying for a real good rainy season to come. And so the people, this is one of the greatest celebrations in all of Israel. The people are in a joyful mood, they're happy, and they do that for 7 days. Then on the 8th day, they double that. They do 2 times they do the water. They have the lighting of the menorah, the candelabra. They have the ceremony of the lighting. Now, folks, when you study the Old Testament, what you will discover was on that 8th day, right in the middle of that celebration, when they're lighting those candles on the Feast of Tabernacles, Jesus says, I am the light of the world, right there in that temple precinct. And he tells them, I'm the water of life, right there in the middle of all that celebration. This time of the year at Sukkot that they're celebrating now is when Jesus came to Jerusalem. At the ceremony of lighting the menorahs, he told them that he was the light of the world. Well, that's kind of significant when you put 2 and 2 together, doesn't it? Make the Old Testament a lot more understandable when you bring it into the New Testament. Well, let me show you some things over here before I get started over there. I have several things here. This is a sheepskin scroll. It's out of sheepskin, and this is handwritten with a quill pen. It's about 125 years old, and it came out of Europe, survived the Holocaust. They kept it hid, and then eventually brought it out of Europe to Israel, and from Israel to here. But this markings on here, these tabs, indicate the location of Exodus chapter 20 with the 10 Commandments. So that makes this a much significant scroll if you have a copy of the 10 Commandments. This is all handwritten. Now, the Dead Sea Scrolls, if you could see them, they're exactly the same thing as this right here. Only they're 2,000 years old and a lot more brittle. But they would look absolutely identical, written the same way for 2,000 years. And do you know, what would you think? This one's about 125 years old. If you found a Dead Sea Scroll with Exodus chapter 20 on it, well, this entire section, what are the chances that a copy made of a copy made of a copy made of a copy for 2,000 years would be exactly the same? 99.9% identical. There's just no significant difference at all between a scroll 2,000 years ago and one that was made of a copy 200 times that occurs today. That's how accurate they were in making the copies of the Scriptures. So you can come up, I'll allow you to touch that and get a feel for it. It's like it's real heavy cardstock paper. Now right here is a deerskin scroll. And this scroll came out of Yemen, and it's about 250 years old, maybe a little more than that. But this is deerskin. Deerskin's not going to last as long as the sheepskin. Sheepskin lasts a couple of thousand years. These are not going to, they're not going to last that long. But this is sheepskin. This one begins with Leviticus chapter 16, which is the Day of Atonement, and we'll get to that Thursday night. That's significant. But this, come up and take a look at that. That's deerskin. That little old piece of paper thing under it with that Egyptian pharaoh on it is papyrus. Comes out of Egypt. Their writing material that a lot of things were written on in papyrus. That's real papyrus. I'm not going to cover everything tonight. I'm just going to pick out some feature things. I'll tell you this. These things right here are lamps. You put your oil in there, you put you a wick out here, and you can see this one still has the black marks on it. This one is one of my newest ones. It's only 1,700 years old. So that's one of my new pieces up here. And I have others. Now right here, I have one that is a Herodian style. This one was here when Jesus was here. That dates back to the time of old Herod the Great. He died while Jesus was young, but this was here when Jesus was here. I'll talk about some of the others later. But I want to pick out a couple of things that relate to our study tonight about Abraham being Ur of Chaldees, and he leaves Ur, comes to the land of Canaan, has Isaac, and then Jacob, and Jacob has the 12 sons with the 12 tribes, and they end up in Egypt. Well, right here is a cone. And it has hieroglyphic writing and Mesopotamian language. This is the earliest of the early, the very earliest writing. And this on here is telling about a king. I can't pronounce his name. He's the king of a city named Lagash. That's easy to pronounce. And he was building a temple dedicated to his pagan god, and it's all on the history here. And he had a son. The son also built his own city, and the son built the city after his name, Ur. Abraham came from Ur. Okay, this is the daddy of Ur on this stone right here. I'm going to save the old one. Now this one is somewhere close to 4,000 years old. But I'll talk about the old one tomorrow night. We'll get to it later. Now, another really significant piece that I've got is this piece right here, and this is called a juglet. And it's specifically called a juglet, and you got to get your tongue just right to pronounce it. Tel El Yehudiyeh juglet. Tel means hill, came out of a hill. The first time they ever found these juglets was in Ramesses, Egypt, in the cemetery for the Jews, the Hebrews that were in captivity. This goes back to Moses' day. And they brought some of these with them out of Egypt, and I don't know where this one exactly come from in southern Israel, but it was found somewhere out in the desert out there, and found its way to here. Now, I was in Israel last year when the pandemic really hit hard back in March, and when I tell you that our group was the last tourist out of Israel, I mean we were the last tourist out of Israel. Matter of fact, they canceled our flight. We were stuck 2 extra days, not knowing how we were going to get out, and not knowing until we got home that the State Department sent an airplane over to get us. And the airport was closed when we got to the airport to leave. They had to open up the airport to get us through there, and the airport was closed. So anyway, some of these things I was able to purchase there when everything shut down and the price went down. And that's the only way I can afford this kind of stuff. But I do have an item right here, and it's really hard to see, so I got to keep it boxed up. And you're welcome to come and look at it, but it's a little bitty thing, and sometimes little bitty things are not cheap. This is a scarab. Now the Egyptians in Egypt worshipped everything under the sun, and one of their gods was a dung beetle. Y'all know what that is? Out in Texas we call them tumblebugs. All right, I don't want to talk too much about that, but anyway. But it's a stone. They carved it out of stone in the shape of a dung beetle, and on the bottom of it, it has the name of Thutmose III, the Pharaoh of the Exodus that was there at the time of Moses, when Moses was bringing the plagues on Egypt. Well, he was getting them on this guy right here. I have also just this last weekend ordered another artifact that came available. and it's a much larger piece. It's a rectangular flat stone is a stamp. And it has a large image of Thutmose III on it. And beside him is a horse, one of the gods that God killed. He attacked in the plagues of Egypt. And then on the back side, it's got several other gods, but it has wording that it is a military term, and that Thutmose III himself did not use that stone, but one of his military leaders had that stone with his authority. And so that military leader used the stone, and that by orders of Thutmose III, and all that's on that stone. So it came available. I'm going to have to go home and tell my wife I've ordered that. I hope it doesn't come before I get back and she'll have to ask me about it, but you know how that is, don't you? All right. Let's get right into our study. The Lord told Moses, he said, let me turn that on. Now look, ladies, I may need your help, okay? You know how we men are? Yep, we lay stuff down, can't find it. So if you just see me looking around up here everywhere, just point. It's over there. It's over there. You laid it down over there. I depend on y'all to help me out a little bit here. Okay. All right. In Exodus chapter 25 and verse 8, God told Moses, "Let them make me a sanctuary that I may dwell among them." You know, there in the Garden of Eden, when God created Adam and Eve, He placed them there in the garden. And the Bible says that in the cool of the day that they would go for a walk with God. I could only imagine, just even imagine what it would be like for Adam out having a walk with God. And then one day God came to meet up with them to go for their walk, and they were not there. And God began looking for them, and they weren't to be seen. God began to call at them, and they were hid among the trees of the garden, because in the meantime they had sinned against God. And sin entered into the human race, and enmity between God and man, and fellowship was broken between mankind and the Lord. But out in the wilderness with the nation of Israel, God told Moses to let them make me a sanctuary that I may dwell with them. So out there in that desert, God proposed building this tabernacle, which by the way is a temple. It is a portable temple. Everything true about the temple is true about the tabernacle. The temple is just much larger and more permanent, but the tabernacle was a temporary portable temple. So when you learn about one, you're also learning about the other. And so God told Moses to build that portable temple as a dwelling place where fellowship between God and man could be restored, and and man could be at peace with one another. And so I want you to always remember that every time an attempt has been made to make reconciliation with God, it's always God who took the initiative to restore fellowship with us. And so God is the one that built the sanctuary so that He could restore fellowship with mankind. Now, the tabernacle was an object lesson to the Israelites. Some of you teach children, some of you Sunday school teachers, sometimes you use an object lesson. Use something material, and you'll make a spiritual application to it, an illustration. Well, the tabernacle, and not just the tabernacle, but the priesthood, the sacrifices, the holy days, basically the entire law was an object lesson to teach people that they were sinners, they need to be saved, and how and what basis that God could forgive them of their sins. Now, they did not have a Bible. The first Bible was written on stone, and they didn't have everybody have a copy of the Bible. We're pretty fortunate. We can go down to the dollar store and get one for a couple of dollars, but they didn't have one. So the only Bible that they had was the tabernacle and the worship at the tabernacle and the significance that the tabernacle taught. That's how they learned about God and how to be saved and how to serve God in their day and time. Now, there's some mistakes that's often made in the study of the tabernacle, and I'm not bringing this up to point out other people's mistakes, but I'm going to use it as a positive tool to teach. But there are some things out there that I think is mistakenly taught. And one of the things that's mistakenly taught is trying to make everything mean something. One of the books that I have on the tabernacle, I got about 200 volumes. One of the books, the author did what a lot of the others did, but he talked about these brass nails here. We call them tent pegs that were driven in the ground. They tie that cord to the fence and hold that fence down. And he said, and trying to make everything mean something, he said that brass nail driven into the ground is half into the ground and half out of the ground, and that pictures death and resurrection. I mean, you got to have good imagination to come up with that. All right? The Bible does not interpret that for us. That's not in the Scripture. And so when you take liberty and to stretch everything and to try to dig a meaning out of every little detail, you're making a mistake, because people will wonder, and I'm sure like you thought, where in the world did he come up with something like that? Then when he teaches something that is interpreted and it doesn't make it clear, they'll wonder, well, are you making that up too? So we're better off just sticking with what we know. And sometimes there's judgment calls in there, and that's okay. But we have to let folk know, well, this is what I think. This is a judgment call on my part. But this is what the Scripture actually interprets for us. And so that's a mistake, trying to make every little detail of the tabernacle end up meaning something. It probably did, but we don't know what it is. And let's just not waste our time on the stuff we don't know and spend it on the stuff that we can know. The second thing is trying to make things that are similar to be symbolical of each other. Now, you can have two things that are similar, but one is not necessarily symbolical of the other. And I'm going to go to the third point, and I'm going to come back to that, and I'm going to bundle the two of them together. The third mistake is trying to make the tabernacle represent believers and the church. Well, they're there, but so are unbelievers in their need to get saved. And the Old Testament, to the Old Testament saints, the idea of a church was a mystery, and Paul talks about revealing the mystery of the church in the New Testament. So that we could, they didn't know, they didn't have a clue. There's no mention, there's no prophecy in the Old Testament, no language that talks about a church. And so if it represented the church, it represented something that was a mystery and something they could not understand. And so could you imagine some little old boy coming up to a priest and tugging on his garment and saying, well, Mr. Priest, what does that represent? And the priest saying, well, oh, son, that represents a church. And the kid thinks about it a minute, pulls on his garment again and said, well, Mr. Priest, what's a church? Son, I don't have a clue. That's a mystery. It would have absolutely no purpose if it was symbolized a mystery, because they could not understand it. The tabernacle was meant to be understood. The significance of it, the sacrifices and offerings, the priesthood, the holidays, everything about that ceremonial law was meant for them to understand. Otherwise, there would be no purpose in it at all. Now, here's going back to point number 2. Making things that are similar necessarily symbolical of each other. So I'm going to borrow this group over here, and I'm going to say this group over here, y'all be the Old Testament, okay? And then over here, I'm going to ask this group to be the New Testament. Now, y'all don't mind being new if they don't mind being old, right? Okay. This is the old and this is the new. So what we have in the Old Testament, we have a 7-lamp golden menorah. And over here in the New Testament, in the book of Revelation, we have the 7 golden candlesticks, don't we? Do you know that almost every book will come along and say, well, the 7-lamp menorah in the Old Testament represents the 7 golden candlesticks in the New Testament. I grant you, they're similar, aren't they? But what we're making the mistake is that in the Old Testament, we have an object that represents Jesus Christ as the light of the world. Okay? In the New Testament, we have an object that represents Jesus as the light of the world. You see, that represents Jesus as the light. That represents Jesus as the light. So you missed the whole thing if you says that represents this. You missed the whole purpose in all of it. Jesus is the one that's the light of the world, and we reflect His light. And so that's our purpose in the New Testament as well as the Old. All right. Now, when I started doing all my research and study, I got all these books. Sometimes you can read too many books outside of the book. And some books you can't trust. Well, anyway, in doing my research and study, my mind got into a fog. And so one writer says this represents this, and another writer says that represents that, and this and that didn't have a thing in the world to do with each other. And so it was just confusing until finally the light went off one day, and I realized, no, there has to be one main central theme, and everything has to fit that theme. And the more I realized that and studied that thought, I realized that everything fits that theme. The priesthood, the holidays, the sacrifices and offerings, the tabernacle, everything under the ceremonial law fits one main central theme. And in a nutshell, here's what it is. Now, I'll come to all this later several times, but back here in the back room of the tabernacle or the temple was a room called the Holy of Holies. And only the high priest was allowed in there, representing Jesus Christ, by the way. And here in the Holy of Holies represented the throne of God. Outside the fence area here was a nation of people, yea, a whole world of people that was sinful, corrupt, unfit, unclean, undeserving to fellowship with God. And the theme of the tabernacle, in a nutshell, is how that sinner can come through that gate, come to the altar, to the laver, and to the holy place, and be able to enter into the presence of God and fellowship with Him. Now that's in a nutshell what this is all about. How a lost, unfit, unclean sinner can be saved and reconciled with God. Now, with that being true, so here's the central themes of the tabernacle. First of all, we're going to learn about man's sinful depravity. You learn about that law and those sacrifices and offerings and all those laws of clean and unclean. The first thing you realize, man must be pretty bad. He must be pretty wicked. He's no good for nothing, low-down sinner. Matter of fact, somebody says, well, if you can't say something good about somebody, don't say anything at all. Well, if that's the case, it's always true, then we can't say anything good about mankind, can we? Because he is totally corrupt and sinful. That all have sinned and come short of the glory of God. There's none that doeth good. No, not one. And so we put man in a bad light. So these series of services almost become revival, because what we're going to do is we're going to bring man down to the low down, no good for nothing scum that he is, and we can't say anything good about him. And the second thing that we're going to do is we're going to learn of the Lord's holiness and righteousness. So what we learn is how high and magnificent God is, and how low and no good for nothing man is. Man is corrupt, God is holy, and God is just. So that there is an eternity between God and men. Here's what false religion does. I don't care what label you put it under, but false religion will do this. It will bring man up to a level he doesn't deserve, and bring God down to a level that he doesn't deserve, so that there's only a little bit of difference between us, hey, you clean up your life, you live right, you do good, well, surely God will let you go to heaven. No, that's not the case at all. There's an eternity between God, a holy and righteous God, and a sinful man. And I'll tell you what, it's not until you come to realize how low down man is and how great God is, and that great God reached down in the miry clay and lifted us up and put us on the rock, that's when we realize just how great God's grace is to save the likes of us. God has to be a great God to come down here and save the likes of us. So we learn how great God is. We get the next thing we learn is the change that man must experience in order to fellowship with God. Now listen, God is not going to stoop to our level, so the change has to be made in us. And bless your heart, we can't make that change. Only God can make that change in us. So that when we get to heaven, it's all God, by the grace of God. You know, I don't ask God to be fair with me. I pray and beg for mercy. I don't want to get what I deserve. I have to plead on mercy for God to forgive me. And there has to be a change in us. The fourth thing that we're going to learn is that how sinful man could be reconciled and approach a holy and just God. What terms, what conditions? It just doesn't happen. The fifth thing that we learn is the plan of salvation. Now take this one with you tonight if you don't walk out of here with anything else. That the folk over here in the Old Testament were saved exactly like the souls are in the New Testament. They were not saved by keeping the law. Excuse me. They were not saved by sacrifices at the altar. They were saved with the promise of a coming Messiah who would die for their sins. Just exactly like we are. Any of y'all eyewitness to it? No, I did. All I got is the book that tells me he did, right? I trust that book that promised and tells me that Jesus died for my sins. They trusted the same promise, the same book, that he would come and die for their sins. And if people could be saved by the law and making sacrifices and offerings, we'd have an altar out there and we'd have a big pasture of goats out here. And we'd still be making those sacrifices, and Jesus wouldn't have had to die. But he died for them just like he died for them. Same plan of salvation for all ages. It's faith in Jesus Christ. They had faith he would, we have faith that he did, and it's the same faith. So the tabernacle then is a figure of Jesus Christ, his life, his works, his attributes, and his character. It's all about Jesus. Now I'm going to brag just a little bit tonight. Y'all don't mind me doing that. I've been doing this now for 35 years. Hard to think back that far. That's half of my life and a little bit more. But anyway, I'm going to brag a little bit, and I'm going to say this, that any question that you have about the tabernacle, I can answer that with a Bible answer. Now, the Bible interprets the significance of all of this, okay? I don't have to come up with it. I don't have to read somebody else's book to come up with it. The Bible interprets it, and particularly the book of Hebrews. For instance, Hebrews chapter 8 and verse 5, talking about the tabernacle, the furnishings, and so on. It says, who serve unto the example and shadow of heavenly things, as Moses was admonished of God when he was about to make the tabernacle. For see, saith he, that thou make all things according to the pattern showed to thee in the mount. By the way, this young man back here, I promised him something. Brother Jared, if before we leave, make sure I do something, okay? Remind me at the end of the service. I got to do something for him. All right. That thou make all things according to the pattern showed thee in the mount. Hebrews chapter 9, verse 5, which was a figure for the time then present, in which were offered both gifts and sacrifices that could not make him that did the service perfect as pertaining to the conscience. Couldn't save him. Verse 12, neither by the blood of goats and calves, but by his own blood he entered once into the holy place, having obtained eternal redemption for us. And then we go to verse 24. For Christ is not entered into the holy places made with hands, the tabernacle, which are the figures of the true, but into heaven itself, now to appear in the presence of God for us. Chapter 10, verse 1, for the law, having a shadow of good things to come, and not the very image of the things, can never, with those sacrifices which they offered year by year continually, make the comers thereunto perfect. And verse 4, for it is not possible that the blood of bulls and goats should take away sins. So they weren't saved by the altar sacrifices or keeping the law. They're saved by faith in Jesus. Now back to what I said. Now listen, I can answer any question that you have about tabernacle. You go out that door out there and you say, well, Brother Bobby, what about this? I can answer that with a scriptural answer. Now, it might be Hebrews chapter 9, verse 5, talking about the ark. It says, and over it the cherubims of glory, shadowing the mercy seat. Now, get this, of which we cannot now speak particularly. Now, if you understand that verse, you understand this. You ask me any question you want, I might have to answer you, I don't have a clue. Hebrews 9:5. That's my favorite verse. I'll refer to that more times this week, maybe any other. See, if the Apostle Paul didn't have all the answers, where do you think I could come up with them? You know, he didn't know it all, so how in the world could I come up with them? So some things we have to be satisfied that we don't have the answer to it. Now, when the Israelites set up camp, and that picture right there, that slide, just simply shows you that the Old Testament tabernacle symbolism was about Jesus and his death on the cross. It is exactly the same message, the exact same message we preach today, that Jesus come and died on the cross for our sins. He told them he would, he told us he did. It's the same message. That's all about Jesus in this series. Now, looking at the tabernacle there in the courtyard, and some of these things I moved through pretty fast, as you've already figured out. Well, I'm going to go over them multiple times this week, so by the time the week's over with, you're going to be able to identify with them. And talking about the camp arrangement, the tabernacle always faced in the direction of east. Is this east? Which way is east? This way? All right, when I get out in the country, I can get turned around. All right, this is east right here. Well, if Moses had to put this up, he would have turned it facing the direction of east. The only way they were allowed to assemble it is the front entranceway always had to face the direction of east. And I think that's significant because the scripture tells us that the priest camped on the east side. The tribe of Judah camped on the east side. The chief entrance to Solomon's temple was on the east. And the chief entrance into Herod's temple was on the east. So the tabernacle likewise was on the east. And I think the significance here is the fact in Matthew chapter 24 and verse 27, for as lightning cometh out of the east, so shall also the coming of the Son of Man be. And then Jesus further said in chapter 25, he said, when the Son of Man shall come in his glory, and all the holy angels with him, then shall he sit upon the throne of his glory. And what direction is he coming from? He's coming from the east. He's coming from, well, that's our look right now, isn't it, folks? I'll tell you what, with politics and the world the way it is today, we need to be looking that direction. Just looking in the skies, coming, as somebody said the other day, keep your eyes on the skies because the Lord's coming back and he's going to fix everything. Well, the Lord promised that he's one day going to come to the earth and rule and reign for 1,000 years. And when he comes, what direction is he coming from? As lightning cometh out of the east, so shall also the coming of the Son of Man be. So it's my take on that they always had to place the tabernacle facing the direction of east as a prophetic reminder of the coming of the Lord, and to always be looking up and always expecting and anticipating the coming of the Lord to the earth. All right, as we move along a little bit, there were the 12 tribes of Israel camped around the tabernacle, and they camped according to the standard bearer. The word standard means a banner, and so that the 12 tribes of Israel would camp around the outside perimeter of the tabernacle, and they had a standard they're going by. On the east side, where the priest camped on the east side, and whenever they moved, they went first in the move. The people on the east side, that would be on the entrance, whenever it came time to pack up and move, they went first. They packed up, they got out of the way first. Then the second group of the 12 tribes was on the south side, and that would be over here on the left-hand side. They went second in the march. Then the Levites would pack up the tabernacle, and they were in the middle of the march. So you got the east side, the south side, now you got the tabernacle. Now the third group of Israelites, the 12 tribes, they went third in the march, and then last of all, those that were on the north side, they were fourth in the march. So that's how they traveled. Now, when Israel came out of the land of Egypt, there was about 2.5 million people. And the best way I compare this, because I'm close and I did my math, so just let me borrow a Texas illustration, that if you took everybody that lived in Dallas, Texas, and you took in the cities that border Dallas, not Fort Worth, because they don't have a border that touches, but you've got Duncanville and Mesquite and Garland and those areas that border the city of Dallas. If you add all them up, you got about 2.5 million people. Could you imagine everybody in Big D packing up and moving the same day to Oklahoma City? Would you want to be in that bunch to get trampled along the way? When they left, they went in a very orderly fashion, like a military camp, and one group took the lead, then the second group left, then the tabernacle in the middle, and then the third and the fourth groups, and that's how they traveled through the wilderness. And when they got to the location, they put the tabernacle up, and they camped around the tabernacle according to their standard bearers. And here's what's unusual. The standard for the east was the tribe of Judah. The standard for the north was Reuben, and the symbol for Judah was a lion, and the symbol for Reuben was a man. And then on the west side, Ephraim banner, and the symbol for Ephraim was that of a calf. And so on the north side, you had Dan, and the symbol of Dan was an eagle. So you got a lion, a man, a calf, and an eagle. You know, that's not the first time we've heard that. Those banners around there had the symbols of these objects representing them. And the first time we hear anything about that is in Ezekiel's vision of heaven and John's vision in the book of Revelation. Ezekiel saw the throne of God. And around the throne of God, Ezekiel saw these strangest creatures you could ever imagine. And these creatures had 4 faces. They had the face of a lion, the face of a man, the face of a calf, and the face of an eagle. And they could look every direction at one time, and the scripture says they go forward any direction. So if they go that way, they go forward. They go that way, they go forward. They go that way, they go forward, because they had faces in every direction. And those 4 creatures are in chapter 10 of Ezekiel are called cherubim, part of the host of the angelic host. They were called cherubim, and that was their faces. And they were around the throne of God. And the very same creatures are on the banners of the 12 tribes surrounding the camp of Israel. And then in the book of Revelation, chapter 4, John the Revelator saw these 4 living creatures surrounding the throne of God, and he saw the 4 creatures had the face of a lion, the face of a calf, the face of a man, and the face of an eagle. So that symbolism is around the tabernacle that they saw around the very throne of God itself. Okay, now the Levites also camped around the tabernacle. But what we got? We got 3 tribes here, 3 there, and 3 there. But they had to camp way out. they're more than a half a mile away. And then they camped way out. Between these tribes camped the tribe of Levi. Now, Brother Levi had 4 boys, Merari, Gershon, and Kohath. I got the reverse order in age, but that's the 3 sons. Over here on the east side camped the priest. I'll talk about the priest a little bit later, but Aaron was the first high priest of Israel. Aaron and his sons and grandsons served in the priesthood. So Aaron's family is pulled out as the priesthood, and they camped over here. The family of Kohath camped over here on this side. Now, the family of Kohath was in charge of all of the furniture. They were in charge of making and maintaining the furniture. That was their job. When it came time to move, they were not given any transportation. They had to carry the furniture by hand. Particularly that Ark of the Covenant was ordered. You got to carry that by hand. We'll come back to that later. And so the Kohathites were not given any wagons or means of transportation. They had to carry the furniture by hand. Then over here on the other end was the Gershonites. The Gershonites were in charge of the boards, the bars, they were in charge of the furnishing, the fabric, the coverings over the top, the fence that went around it, anything that was fabric, the Gershonites were in charge of that. Then over here on this side, on the north side, was the Merarites, and they're in charge of the boards, the bars, the pillars, the sockets, the bases, anything wood and metal. They covered that. Now the Gershonites over there were given 2 wagons and 4 oxen to carry their stuff. This group over here had a heavier load. They were given 4 wagons and 8 oxen to carry all of their stuff. And so they camped between the 12 tribes and the tabernacle, and they had to leave a vacant space around the tabernacle. And I may be getting way ahead of all of my points right here. I got it covered. All right. I just can't keep up. I talk too fast to keep up with myself, don't I? All right. I want to get to there right quick. But anyway, there had to be a vacant space between Israel and the tabernacle. A lot of pictures, a lot of artists. There's a company in California that does a lot of publishing on this stuff, and they got some beautiful artwork, beautiful drawings, beautiful pictures, and they've got one of the tabernacle. And I wrote them and I told them, when you reprint that, consider making some corrections to it. They didn't answer me, but that's okay. But they were showing the tents right up next to the fence. They were showing the priest in the courtyard with shoes on. They were making sacrifices on the south side of the altar. They got people in there just looking around. 4 things right there that have got somebody killed, and they need to correct that, but whether they do or not, we'll see. All right, we're going to take a quick look at this little video here.
And thou shalt make the court of the tabernacle. For the south side southward there shall be hangings for the court of fine twined linen of 100 cubits long for one side, and the 20 pillars thereof, and their 20 sockets shall be of brass. The hooks of the pillars and their fillets shall be of silver. And likewise for the north side in length there shall be hangings of 100 cubits long, and his 20 pillars and their 20 sockets of brass, the hooks of the pillars and their fillets of silver. And for the breadth of the court on the west side shall be hangings of 50 cubits, their pillars 10, and their sockets 10. And the breadth of the court on the east side eastward shall be 50 cubits. The hangings of one side of the gate shall be 15 cubits, their pillars 3, and their sockets 3. And on the other side shall be hangings 15 cubits, their pillars 3, and their sockets 3. And for the gate of the court shall be an hanging of 20 cubits, of blue, and purple, and scarlet, and fine twined linen, wrought with needlework. And their pillars shall be 4, and their sockets 4. All the pillars round about the court shall be filleted with silver. Their hooks shall be of silver, and their sockets of brass. The length of the court shall be 100 cubits, and the breadth 50 everywhere, and the height 5 cubits of fine twined linen, and their sockets of brass. All the vessels of the tabernacle in all the service thereof, and all the pins thereof, and all the pins of the court, shall be of brass. And thou shalt command the children of Israel, that they bring thee pure oil olive beaten for the light, to cause the lamp to burn always. In the tabernacle of the congregation without the veil, which is before the testimony, Aaron and his sons shall order it from evening to morning before the Lord. It shall be a statute forever unto their generations on the behalf of the children of Israel.
All right. There was, whenever Israel started out of Egypt, they came to a place called Etham, and from that point on, there was a cloud that led them about in the wilderness. Now, you see the picture diagram right there, and that looks like smokestack coming out, but that's actually a representation of that cloud. Now, we don't know what it looked like, but somehow that cloud would hover over the Holy of Holies. Actually, what we call the Shekinah light on the Day of Atonement was an extension of that cloud. That cloud was showing God's presence. So that cloud would come down into the Holy of Holies. And that cloud would be there. So whenever they move through the wilderness, when the cloud starts up, then they blow the trumpets, sound the trumpets to converge on the tabernacle to start getting it ready to move. The priest would come in and cover all the furniture and get it ready. The Kohathites came in, picked it up, they took it out. By the time the Kohathites get out the front door, then the Gershonites are taking the fence down and all the fabric parts off, and by the time they get one end of the fence taken down, here comes the Merarites, and they're taking up the post and everything and taking the tabernacle apart. I'm going to assume that they could probably have that thing taken down and gone within 3 hours, because they had as many as 16,000 Levite men eligible to come and take this thing apart. So I don't think it really took them all that long. I would suspect it'd take them a good part of a day to put it back up, because you got to do some layout and measurements and so on. But it's easier to take it down than it would be to put it back up. So they followed the cloud. The cloud would go up and the cloud would start moving. God did not tell them where they were going. He didn't have to tell them. All they were to do is obey. And they followed the cloud throughout the wilderness. When the cloud stopped and the cloud came down, that indicated where the Holy of Holies would be positioned, and they put the rest of the tabernacle up facing the direction of east from the positioning of the cloud over that. Now, there's 3 main areas in the tabernacle precincts, and this is important to know what they are. Out here on the outside area, this area right here has got the altar and laver in it. This just inside the fence, this area right here is called the courtyard. Anybody could come in the courtyard provided they had an animal sacrifice. No sacrifice, no come in. Even the priest going on duty had to have an animal sacrifice to go in. They might come and go for that tour of duty, but when they first come, they got to bring an animal sacrifice and offer it at the altar when they enter into the courtyard fence. So anybody could come in there, but you had to have the sacrifice. You couldn't go down there and look around, just see what they're doing and find out what's going on. You had to bring an animal sacrifice to get in that courtyard. The second area to the tabernacle is inside the building itself. It's the first room, and it's called the holy place. Only the priest could go in the holy place. Any and all the priests could go in the holy place. Now, they didn't come and go from all day long to go in there. There were 2 main times of the day that they went in there to do service, and that was at the time of the morning sacrifice at 9 a.m. and the time of the evening sacrifice at 3 p.m. They would go in there and work at the menorah, the candlestick, the table of showbread, or the altar of incense. but that only the priest that had a business there would go in there. But it was open to any of them could go in there if they were on duty to work there. And then the third place is called, the third room is in the back room back here, and you have to go through the holy place to get there. In the back room back here, this room's called the Holy of Holies, and only the high priest could go into the Holy of Holies on the annual Day of Atonement, and he went in there 2 times that day in the Holy of Holies. Now the next question that's going through your brain is, well, what did they do when they moved it? Well, when the cloud goes up, God is not present. And so the priest could go in there and cover the Ark of the Covenant and the other pieces of furniture and then bring them out, and then the Levites, the tribes of Levites would carry them to, Kohathites carry them to the next location. They could go in there because the cloud had gone up. God was no longer present there. They were free to go in, pack up the Ark of the Covenant, and get it ready to go to the next location. Now, just quickly, we're going to share with you the size of it. Now, the distance of it from this side to this side is approximately 75 feet. It's 150 feet long. The fence is 7.5 feet high. The building structure from one end of it to the other, max from end to end, is 48 feet long, and it is 18 feet wide, and it is 15 feet high on the inside. Makes a cube back here in the Holy of Holies, about 10 cubics by 10 cubics, or 15 feet by 15 feet, and that's the overall size of the tabernacle. And I'll come back to some more of that a little bit later in the week. So we got that covered. Now I want to talk about the fence, and we're going to wind up here with the fence that went around the courtyard. The fence pillars, we call them fence posts, were probably made of wood. And we say probably made of wood because, it doesn't say. But there were other pillars, and it specifically says they were wood. And I think it's a safe conclusion that we all come to, that the fence posts were made of wood. Well, out there in that northern Sinai desert, not far from the Dead Sea, are these acacia trees that they used to build the tabernacle, the Ark of the Covenant, and everything out of. And I went down there, and at one time I was there, I was told that tree was down there, and I asked some guys, what would it cost them to go cut me a limb off, and one of them brought me back a palm tree. And so the next time I went, I made arrangements to carry the saw on board the airplane with me, had permission from the Israeli government to cut the limb off, and I showed them the picture of the tree. So this is a real piece of Shittim wood that's named in the Bible, Shittim wood, called acacia wood today. This is a real piece of that wood. This piece of wood was growing in an area that gets about 1/2 inch of rainfall per year. And that stuff right there is as hard as a rock. My wife says it's so hard, it's as hard as my head. I don't know what she means by that, but anyway. That's pretty hard stuff. You can come up and handle that because you're not going to hurt that stuff right there. And this limb right there is estimated to have been about 50 years old, so that the tree was probably 400 years old that this limb was growing out of. And so this is that real wood that they built the Ark of the Covenant and everything out of, and the fence post and everything out of. And you can come and handle that. Guys like to see that kind of stuff. So the posts were made out of wood, acacia wood, and then the bases to the pillars were made out of brass. So they would set these brass bases on the ground. They'd stand the post up in that, and then the caps, or the top to the post, to cover the top, was made out of silver, made out of pure silver. And I can't read that, the bottom line back there on all the way from up here. The linen, the fence of it, was made out of a fabric called fine twine linen. Now, fine twine linen, I have some fabric up here, but right here, somebody's asking, what's that? Looks like horsehair or something, doesn't it? That is flax plant fiber. A flax plant is a reedy, tall plant about the size of a drinking straw or a pencil. It might grow this high, and they would cut it and they split it lengthwise, open it up, and these little tiny fibers are inside. And they would take those fibers out, and linen is the most expensive fabric in the world. On this table right here, this fabric that you see here is linen. This is the real linen stuff. Now, it's the cheap linen, inexpensive linen. And this right here, I bought it by accident. I run into it in Thailand. I couldn't find it here. Now, it's more available than it used to be. You can buy it sometimes in stores today. But 35 years ago, you could not find this stuff in America. And it was very expensive. And I bought this in Thailand, and it was well over $200 for just enough linen to go on my table here. So it's a pretty expensive fabric. It was more expensive in Thailand than silk was, believe it or not. Silk is cheaper than that. But what they would do is they would take that fiber out of here, and they would make it into a thread, and they made their clothes, linen clothes out of it. Now, you can see this is an off-white brownish color. That would be pretty typical for their dress. But fine twine linen was different. They would get this linen, this fiber out, and what makes it so expensive is that the fiber has a little husk on it in that plant. So that when they take it out, they soak it in water and leave it for several days. They take it out, let it totally dry. They put it back in the water. They do that several times. Then finally, they take it out, let it dry, and they begin to do like this, and it begins to break that husk off, and that husk makes a terrible mess, and they're getting that husk off. Then they have to pull it through some combs to get the last husk off of it. So it's labor intensive to come up with the linen. But fine twine linen was even a lot more than that. The fine twine linen, you had to get in the light, and you got to get your bifocals adjusted, because you're going to sit here and you're going to pick out the white fiber. You're going to pull it out and lay it over here. And you're going to go through a whole bunch of this stuff till you get a bunch of white fibers over here. And so everything about that fence, 150 feet long, 75 feet wide, and 7.5 feet high, was that high dollar fine twine linen. In 1945, you could buy real linen from Italy. Now it's a lot cheaper, but here's an example. In 1945, if you wanted the real stuff, you'd have to order it from Italy. And a lady in Greenville at one of my seminars years ago brought me that handkerchief and said, "This is real stuff. This is the real linen." And she had bought that. And she had the catalog that she bought it out of. 1945. You know, some people just keep everything, don't they? She gave me the catalog, and I got it in my file. And to buy real cheap linen was $300 a yard in 1945. Now, thank goodness the price has come down, or I wouldn't have had that on my table. But in 1945, it was that expensive. Now, if this stuff is $300 a yard, what is that fine twine linen? $1,000 a yard. That's expensive fabric. And that's what they used in the fence of the tabernacle, is the high dollar, the fine twine linen stuff. Now that white linen in symbolism represents the righteousness of Christ. And what we read in Revelation 19 verse 7, speaking of his bride, it said, "And to her was granted that she should be arrayed in fine linen, clean and white, for the fine linen is the righteousness of the saints." Well, where'd we get it? We got it in Jesus. Jesus is righteous. He's perfect. He's sinless. And Jesus is without sin. Here's the verdict found in the Bible. Pilate said, "I find no fault with this man." Pilate's wife told him to have thou nothing to do with that just man. Judas Iscariot said that I have sinned and that I betrayed innocent blood. The thief on the cross said, this man hath done nothing amiss. The centurion said, certainly this was a righteous man. Peter, who knew the Lord as well as anybody, said that he knew no sin, neither was guile found in his mouth. The Heavenly Father said, this is my beloved Son, in whom I am well pleased. The Apostle Paul said that he was holy, harmless, undefiled, and separate from sinners. And Jesus challenged the Jews, which of you convinceth me of sin? Listen, folks, Jesus had to be sinless from the time of his birth to the moment of his death. He never had to apologize to God or man at any time for having done anything wrong, because he lived without sin. He had to be sinless in order for us to be saved. If he had been a sinner, he would have needed to be saved just like the rest of us. But he was born without sin. Now, why do you put a fence up? You put a fence up for two reasons: to keep some things in and to keep some things out, don't you? Well, doesn't it seem strange that God told Moses, let them make me a sanctuary that I may dwell with them, and then I declare, folk, if God doesn't come up and put up a fence 150 feet long, 75 feet wide, 7.5 feet high, that says, keep out, do not enter, you're not welcome here. He told them in the instructions for building the fence that if anybody climbed over or anybody crawled under, I'll kill them. The British have a fancy way of saying it. They'll enter under pain of death. You do and you die. You cannot enter here. That white linen fence around the tabernacle was like a great big billboard sign with neon letters that says, keep out, do not enter. You are not welcome here. Stay out. Well, could you imagine when they built the tabernacle? You know, it's going to be the dwelling place of God. And so some Jewish guy's up on the side of the mountain, and he's tending his sheep, and somebody comes by and word got out that the tabernacle was finished and that God was in the tabernacle. He comes running down that hill and around this tent and around that tent, comes running out there in a screech, in a big old open area, and has to come to a screeching halt because now they got a great big fence around it that says keep out. Doesn't that sound like it contradicts the whole purpose of God? To fellowship with man, and he puts a fence up that says keep out? Wait a minute. Wait a minute. There was one way in. There was a gate that you could enter in, provided that you brought a sacrifice. Oh, there was one way in that you could go in. If you brought an acceptable sacrifice, and inasmuch as God's the one who's been offended, he has the right to choose the sacrifice. And the only acceptable sacrifice to God is the blood of his very own Son. That's the only sacrifice God will accept. People say, well, you Baptists, y'all are so narrow. You think the only way into heaven is through Jesus Christ and you can't get any other way. Well, I'm telling you that there's nobody else lived, died, buried, and raised again from the dead that's qualified to save us from our sins. He's the only one that can. He died for us. He paid the price. He's the only way. It's do or die. Take it or leave it. No choice. No third way. No plan A. No plan B. There's one way and there's one way only. Jesus says, I am the way. No man cometh unto the Father but by me. It's through Jesus Christ. Whether you're an American, whether you're a Christian, whether you're a Hindu, whether you're a Buddhist or whatever you are, or a Muslim, it doesn't matter who you are. There's only one way, and that's through Jesus Christ. And he's the only way in. Take it or leave it, do or die. I trust, and most of you come out for a Bible study, but I trust if you have not taken Christ as your Savior, how do you do that? By repenting of your sins and confessing them to the Lord and seeking his forgiveness. You can take with him and you can walk with him, and he will walk with you, and you can go into the presence of God and fellowship with him. Brother Pastor, you come and take charge.
Normally at a time like this, we have a verse of invitation, but I would like to do maybe a little different. tonight, you can enter that gate. You can walk through that gate because it's been opened through his sacrifice. It's up to you. Romans 10 put it clearly. Whosoever shall call upon the name of the Lord shall be saved. Whosoever accepts that sacrifice will be saved. Will be allowed into that sinless gate. So that's up to you. It's your time to make a decision with Jesus. Let us pray. Father, I come to you in this moment, Lord, again, thank you for what we have together. What we all have in common. Not our sinfulness, because that is just kind of. But what we have together is your grace. For as Romans put it, where sin did abound, grace did much more abound. And through this week, while we study, we learn a lot about your tabernacle in the Old Testament. As it has been said, what we learn in the Old will enlighten what we know in the New, and will enrich our relationship with you. So, Father, I pray for those that are here tonight, those that will watch this later. God, let them be enriched. Let them be drawn closer. Let their passion for you be reignited. It has burned low. God, let us never forget the beauty, the wonder, the horror, and the grace of the sacrifice of Jesus Christ. Thank you for that blood that covers my sin. To you be the glory tonight. And if there are any who have questions concerning their salvation, let them seek you. Let them seek you tonight. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen. Before we dismiss this evening, thank you for Brother Bobby. I know he's willing to stay and talk about some of his special accoutrements. I just want to use that word, but I really want to be honest. But he's talked about some of them before. He'd love to show you more afterwards. They'll be here through Thursday night. I know he's not planning to pack any of them up until Thursday. So if you have a chance, come be as interactive as you can be. Like I said, there's some things you can touch, there's some you can't. I'm not giving up anything that's over my own age if you're breaking it myself. I hope you enjoyed this week. Are there any announcements that we need to make before we dismiss?
We both forgot, didn't we?
Yeah, I saw you pick it up and thought maybe it was.
What's this young man's name back here again? Paxton. Okay. I promised him that we would sound the trumpet, the shofar.
You might want to mute that microphone before you do that.
Undo it.
You might want to mute that microphone before you go that far.
Will you-